My name is Wayne Beaton, and I am the Director of Open Source Projects here at the Eclipse Foundation. In this video, I'm going to talk about committer elections. For Eclipse projects and the open source world in general, committers are the folks who have the real power. Committers decide what code goes in to a code base, they decide how to build a project, and they ultimately decide what gets delivered to the adopter community. Committer elections are the means by which new committers are added to the project. Like every process that we have at the Eclipse Foundation, the committer election process has been defined and tools have been created to support important underlying principles. The rules of engagement are foundational principles that underpin how we believe that open source should be done. Eclipse projects must be transparent. To operate in a transparent manner, Eclipse project teams need to ensure that the community has the ability to understand what the project team is doing. This means that all development plans, issue tracking, and resolution, discussion, and more happens on open channels where people who are not part of the project team can follow along. Eclipse projects must be open. Transparency is concerned with letting people know what you're doing. Openness is concerned with letting them participate as an equal player. As an Eclipse project committer, you have to be open to new ideas and work with contributors to ensure that their contributions have an equal chance of becoming part of the project. Project teams should have well-defined rules for participating that apply to everybody regardless of who they work for or for factors other than the quality of their contributions. Eclipse projects must be meritocratic. Project participants earn their way to additional responsibility. A regular contributor of quality code should be invited to become a committer themselves. A committer who shows leadership may one day become a project lead. We have a well-defined process for turning somebody into a committer that requires a statement of merit. Very often that statement of merit is just a bunch of pointers to contributions that the individual has made to the project. The open source rules of engagement apply to committer elections. There are basically 3 stages to becoming an Eclipse committer. It all starts with contribution. To be a committer, one must first contribute to the project. After having established a pattern of contribution and making one's self known to the team, an existing committer will nominate a candidate and launch a committer election. Following a successful committer election, the successful candidate must engage with the Eclipse Foundation's records team to ensure that the required agreements are in place. I'll talk briefly about each of these. The Eclipse Foundation development process and all Eclipse open source projects by extension work on 3 principles described in the aforementioned open source rules of engagement. Again, Eclipse open source projects must operate in an open, transparent, and meritocratic manner. All 3 of these rules come into play when we're talking about making someone a committer. I'll discuss them in the opposite order. To be considered for committer status, a candidate must demonstrate merit. Generally, this takes the form of making high-quality contributions to the project in the form of patches or new code, but can manifest in other ways. It may make sense, for example, to nominate a committer based on a history of helping users and adopters. A candidate must demonstrate that they understand their responsibilities under the Eclipse Foundation development process as well as how to work with the project team. A demonstration of merit must be something that everybody can see. That is, the demonstration of merit must be transparent to the entire project team, that is, the existing committers, and the general public. Again, code contributions are an obvious example of this, as the commit record is open for all. This is one of the reasons that commits must be correctly attributed. That is, the author field in a Git commit must include the author's name and credentials. Another reason being that implementing an effective intellectual property regime requires it. With the tools available today, it's pretty easy to point to a pattern of contribution. The entire process must be open. That is, in the sense that it is open to all comers. As I like to say, in one form or another, the playing field must be level. That means That the means by which an Eclipse project team decides to make somebody a committer must not be biased by who that individual works for or any criteria other than the quality of the contributions they've made to the project and their demonstration that they understand their roles and responsibilities as a committer. As a committer, you have an obligation to review the contributions made by others and make a reasonable attempt to work with contributors to help them earn more responsibility in the project and ultimately increase the diversity of interests within the project team. Committer elections are the mechanism by which we turn a contributor into a committer. Any committer can start an election by visiting the project's page in the project management interface, logging in, selecting Nominate a Committer, and following the workflow. Elections start with a nomination, and that requires a nomination statement. A committer nomination should explain the candidate's contributions to the project and thus why they should be elected as a committer. The nomination statement should cite the issues they have fixed via patches, cite the community forum postings they have answered, cite the dev list design discussions to which they have contributed, etc. In all cases, the nomination statement should include URLs to source materials. Only project committers may nominate a new committer or vote in a committer election. To be successful, the election must receive a minimum of 3 positive plus 1 votes. Any committer can veto the election by casting a -1 vote or indicate their participation in the process but with no opinion with a neutral +0 vote. For projects with 3 or fewer committers, all committers must vote in the affirmative. Committer elections run for 1 week, but will end immediately if all project committers vote +1. Following a successful committer vote, the project's Project Management Committee, or PMC, will review the election results and then either approve or veto the election. An election may be vetoed, for example, if the PMC feels that the merit statement is not strong enough. The paperwork process will automatically be initiated following PMC approval of an election. As a committer, you have an obligation to participate in committer elections. Even if you haven't worked with a candidate directly, you should be able to invest reasonable effort into reviewing the contributions cited in the nomination statement before casting your vote. The Eclipse Foundation needs to ensure that all committers with right access to the code, websites, and issue tracking systems understand their role in the intellectual property process. The Eclipse Foundation also needs to ensure that we have accurate records of the people who are acting as change agents on the projects. To ensure that committers understand their role and that the Eclipse Foundation has accurate records, committers must provide documentation asserting that they have read, understood, and will follow the committer guidelines. Committers must also gain their employer's consent to the participation in the Eclipse Foundation open source projects. The committer questionnaire is accessible only after an individual has been elected into the role of a committer on a project. New committers will be sent a link to the questionnaire via email. Note that we are dependent on the new committer engaging in the process, and the amount of time that it takes for this part of the process to complete is largely dependent on their engagement. Once the process is complete and the necessary agreements are in place, the committer will be officially designated, that is, they will appear in the committer list, and are off to the races. One more thing. If the Eclipse project uses GitHub, be sure to tell the new committer to add their GitHub username in their Eclipse Foundation account so that our scripts can add them to the GitHub teams that we use to manage access to the Eclipse Foundation repositories hosted on GitHub. Without this information, the new committer will have the committer status in name only. They won't be able to actually do anything. No additional steps are required for projects that use the Eclipse Foundation's GitLab or Garrett instances. So that's it. It all starts with contribution. To be a committer, one must first contribute to the project. After having established a pattern of contribution and making oneself known to the team, an existing committer may choose to nominate the candidate, thereby launching a committer election. Following a successful committer election, the successful candidate must engage with the Eclipse Foundation's records team to ensure that the required agreements are in place.